So I'm going to show you kind of two methods of kind of rendering stills out of Maya for sort of professional use. The first method is going to be really cheap, really quick, and I mean cheap in terms of time. It's very quick to render, very fast, fairly high quality. So the first step, of course, as always, is to go into your render settings. I almost always want to trust the render settings and make sure I'm at full HD 1080p. And then for the scene, I'm going to basically select everything and assign just a basic Lambert. And for the Lambert, I'll set it to full white and give it, at least 50% incandescence. By default, the scene in Maya, I usually turn off the floor grid as well because I find sometimes that grid can be distracting. So turn off the grid, and you can just kind of turn on the options here for multi-sample anti-aliasing. What that does is it takes some of the jagged lines in the preview of the window and smooths them out, makes them a lot kind of cleaner and less jagged and pixelated looking, and also ambient occlusion. So that sort of helps us see the shape and dimensions of the scene. Now, like I said, typically what I like to do is go into the Viewport 2.0 settings under Renderer, Viewport 2.0, and if I scroll down, I'll show you kind of the options here for ambient occlusion. I usually want to max out samples, so that basically means it's going to be less noisy or grainy looking. You can increase the amount. It does make it a bit more contrasting. I find that to be actually a bit more distracting than anything. And you can increase radius, which means spread. But again, I find for these defaults, they generally are okay for ambient occlusion. And then for anti-aliasing, this is kind of smoothing out the edges and wireframes here. I usually turn on both options and, again, max out my samples. And then hit close. Also important too is my camera. Just if you haven't seen other videos or been in other lectures, under the camera, and I believe it's under the shape node here, we have to go to display options and make sure overscan is set to 1. It defaults to 1.3, which gives you this big border. And so next up, I'm going to right click and go to Playblast. I'm actually just creating like a 2-frame loop. I'm sure there's probably a better way, but this is just the kind of lazy way I've done it. Show ornaments is basically like your HD resolution, poly count. If you need to show poly count, you could leave ornaments on. In this case, I'm going to leave them off. And for format, I set it to image. JPEG is fine. And display size from render settings. Again, scale to 100%, and we just want to make sure that saves to a file. It will default to my project folder. So I'm going to hit Playblast. It's literally just going to render 2 frames, and that's it. It's quick, right? So usually what I do, so I'll do for environments typically 2 or more renders. Sometimes I'll do a blend or sort of a high contrast kind of reflective material like blend Phong. Either one of those two. I'll go into my folder here and just show you. So basically you've got like a 2-frame cycle, so it doesn't matter which one you grab. I'm going to just take one and say this is the AO for ambient occlusion render. Okay. And next up I want to do wireframe. So wireframe is quite simply, I usually don't want any object selected, so I usually will pick one of my cameras and then just simply turn on the wireframe on shaded. Now by default the wireframe is not black. I usually prefer it to be black, so if we go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Color Settings, under Inactive Objects, Polygon Surfaces, it's usually kind of in this some sort of blue range. So I usually just set it to black and hit Save. Okay, and then I'll literally just do the same thing, Playblast again. It'll pop up a little 2-second loop of this thing, a 2-frame loop of that. So I'll just go back to my images folder and again rename one of the 2 frames AOWF for wireframe render. So that looks pretty good, right? Now, again, there is some aliasing, meaning you sort of see if you zoom in a little bit, some jagged lines, things of that nature. For most situations, I find this is, for clients, since I'm typically a freelancer when I'm not teaching, the quality is decent enough. There is a bit of splotchiness in the kind of render in the ambient occlusion. So if you want to go sharper, I'll show you method number 2, which is with Arnold.